around that is the 3 rugby clubs. So they would train Tuesdays and Thursdays, like very, very close to each other. And there was so much rivalry in that town, man. It was nuts.
You're not ready. You're not ready. You know, you hit it and it's like, I don't know why I'm not breaking it. Let me see if I can go around it. No, can't go around it. Is there another way for me to get to my objective without dealing with this? No. I
learned so much about sticking to the process over, you know, like focusing on outcomes. The first game we lost was 125-0. And then the next round, that team came back and they beat us like 95-10 or 95-5 or something. And we had the biggest party in the changing room, and they couldn't believe it.
I will always say, if you've gotten a chance to experience the world in an upfront way versus simply being able to hearsay, I will always consider that to be one that is successful.
To be alive, and I've done things cross borders and taken huge risks. And I mean, huge risks, not only, you know, with career-wise, but with my life and, you know, with my stability. And I wanted to do this, so I'm going after it.
I think the minute I stepped on a practice field for rugby, the calling happened.
An 8-year plan to be on the team. And I was in it within 2 years.
Don't wait until you are a pro to be a pro. Right.
And I walk around with a rugby ball sometimes and they're like, what is this child on?
It looks like it was a heavy hit.
It's up. It's not up.
You know, that's the first time I played like professional.
I'm making rugby money. How can I make money outside of it?
And there's 2 Scottish guys and they said, you're here for the movie.
That rugby is a game for all shapes and sizes, all cultural aspects.
He looked at me and he says, you guys are awesome.
Grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Grow Rugby. My name is GiftTime and Bailey, and of course, this is the show where we get to speak to people about the opportunity they have found, created, or taken advantage of via rugby. Yo, man, what a heck of a weekend. Biggest congratulations to the New Zealand Black Ferns, back-to-back Rugby World Cup champions. Great game against England. Of course, number 1 and number 2 going at it again. And England England has the wildest problem of being able to win a Rugby World Cup. I think it's got to hurt after a little bit. Like, has England won a major rugby tournament anytime in the last 2 decades? Like, I know they win game. They're always propped up as one of the best teams in the world. Always, especially first to professional, and everybody's got their money and consistency in it, and yet never able to get over the top. And then people are talking about professional for New Zealand, especially New Zealand Black Ferns, but like they really only been professional for like 3 years, and in reality, it's professional-ish, you know, enough to be able to play consistently together. But yo, I look, man, I can't wait until us as a country are able to, I'm talking about the U.S. right now, are able to get up to that point and start breaking and defeating, because I mean, I love the energy that New Zealand brings. I think it's real. I think it's honestly would have been better than what England would have been able to bring. But man, I can't wait till we get our swag up. So 2031 is at home. All right. I mean, we probably do something a little bit before that, but I'm really looking 2031, be able to bring it home and really show out what exactly we are about. And that, but biggest congratulations, Ruby Tui, with a great post-game speech. I mean, that was meaningful. You felt the energy. 42,000 people in stadium. I think I read somewhere that 1.7 million who ended up watching the Rugby World Cup. So, you know, that's good for that. You know, let's see if we can keep bringing it up for the women's side, and then even continue bringing it up for the men's side, because people are getting excited for this. And then also, big congratulations to the U.S. I mean, in shattering Hong Kong and Kenya in this repechage for the Rugby World Cup for next year. But, you know, we got Portugal. Portugal decided to, like, put a criminal act on Kenya, put up 89 points on them for no reason. All right, just wrong, just trying to skew the point system in their favor. But and look, if the U.S. beats them, and then somebody says some nonsense like, "Oh, the points are not enough," and Portugal wins on that, I'm calling BS. Yo, if your head-to-head goes and both of you have the same score, the head-to-head is what makes a difference. F all the points. So, that being said, man, first, let me just say, not first, this is definitely the second. We got a great guest coming on today. That was some great news. Great guest coming on, Theo Bennett. I don't know if you haven't heard about him. This man has been coaching everywhere. He's in New Zealand, in Brazil, coached all over the U.S., all over Europe. This guy has been everywhere. This is a coaching legend. Philosophically, I'm just philosophically legit. Honestly, I had just met him basically on this interview, and shout out to Kamani Davis, also a guest from the pod. You can check him out. He's the one that made the connection, and I honestly didn't really know that much about Theo, but being able to look back and then have the conversation, I mean, this guy's had a really interesting travel, almost purely rugby life, but we really got into the nitty gritty about how his way of thinking is, and I really am enthralled with that. He's also the owner of the rugby store, Rugby Inc. So, I mean, this is a very much a Renaissance man in the rugby verse, and it was really a pleasure getting to talk to him and, you know, being able to have the real conversations about stuff with him, about rugby and life and how to go about it. So I hope you guys truly enjoy this. On top of that, guys, I need you guys to go ahead and go on to HBCURugbyClassic.com and sign up for our newsletter. Yo, we got some new deals coming out. We got some great things coming. And of course, whoever's in our community, the HBCU Rugby Classic community, the MVP community, the player of the match community, gets the first come, first serve to all information, all deals, early access. I mean, it's going to be real. And the HBC Rugby Classic is coming up fast. Also, big shout out to Howard University Rugby Women, 9-0 on the season this year, this fall. Looking forward to them being able to come out and play and be able to participate in the first HBCU Rugby Classic they'll be at. But what a hell of a season for them. Big shout out to my HBCU Rugby Classic DC partners in this one. So I'm very, very much excited for them and what they've been able to do, especially after really a year and a half, 2 years of being in existence. That is a big accomplishment, and they got such a long runway of things that they get to go do. Like, this is early in the program. So, you guys can also catch, Takunda Rusiki and Catherine Aversanu. Takunda is the captain, for Howard University. Catherine is the head coach. Guys can check out their interviews too, but really, really, really excellent job by them. That's work real done, and that cannot be understated. That cannot be stated enough. That should not be understated. That cannot be stated enough. So I'm really happy for them. Also, y'all, please go check out Rugby Outlet Mall. Yo, we got our Icono Rugby shirts, these beauties, as well as our HBC Rugby merch. We've dropped some new stuff. Of course, Black Friday is coming up. Christmas is coming around. You guys want to get hooked up for the Christmas time because it's going to be real. Look, we're going into 2023 hard. This is going to be the hardest one. We're out of pandemic mode. We're out of our struggle mode. Even if the people say a recession is coming, a recession might be coming, but rugby recession is not here. We're about to be real with it, and I'm excited for you to be able to represent on and off the pitch, whether it's your team, whether you're representing for rugby, whether representing for the HBCU Rugby Classic, you're living it casually. RugbyOutletMall.com. Definitely go check it out. And of course, use promo code GROWRUGBY for 20% off all gear at the Rugby Outlet Mall. 20%, It is an amazing first-time sign-up. And, of course, you guys get signed up for our automatic access so you get to know what's going on. We're all about first for the people who want to be able to help. And then, of course, everybody else, we still got you because we still love you. We want you to know that you are always welcome in the community whenever you choose, whether you do it today or whether you do it tomorrow. Just know that it is for you. And so, yes. Go check it out. I didn't really have a good transition out of that because, my mind is also still on some other stuff. Today is my wedding anniversary, 1 full year. I'm really happy. My beautiful wife, Andrea, as we keep kicking it here in Brazil. But I am excited. So this is also kind of recording a little bit earlier, which I guess is probably more of a good thing because I need to be recording earlier. But this is definitely been a strong, powerful, very impactful. A lot of travel, a lot of learning, a lot of love, a lot of grace. Man, it's good. I recommend if you decide to get married, make sure you definitely have a partner that is willing to go through you thick and thin, because as you get used to each other, man, you're going to get time getting used to each other. But whenever you start getting a rhythm, that's whenever that bond. It's like pure rugby. It's pure rugby. Everybody knows the closest bond happens whenever you're on the pitch and whenever you're on the travel, on the journey. Whenever everything is good and chilled, that's whenever things are like easy. That's not whenever you bond the most. It's whenever you have to work it through and from there, and you get better every single day, every single week, every single month. It's legit. I am stoked for it. So I'm happy for it. It's going to be a good week. And guys, I'm ready for you guys to get ready for this classic, man. I'm just excited. Everything's going through. You got Thanksgiving at the end of this month too. This is a good month. It's a good month to be back into. But guys, I'm not going to hold you back any longer. Please, by all means, get ready. Theo Bennett, founder of Rugby Inc., coach extraordinaire, and I like to say the rugby traveler philosopher. Check it out.
Grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby, grow rugby.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Grow Rugby. I got another incredible IP. I always get these letters of my VIP person over here. He's got a new book out, Virtuitis. He is the runner of the rugby department. Theo Bennett, thank you so much for coming through today.
Thanks for having me here, Gift. This is like a real privilege. Thank you so much.
Man, Theo, I have to first say, your store, I love it. I've seen a lot of gear getting done with it. I've seen it for years now. As one of the few rugby actual athletic apparel and accessories stores here in the U.S., or at least I've always seen it for U.S. based. So I don't know if it is U.S. based, but I know I've seen it in terms of that. But I didn't actually know the person behind it until, our common friend Kamani told it. And he was like, yeah, he runs a real. I was like, oh, there's a face behind this. This makes so much more sense now, And then he was telling me about the book and then obviously conversation. So as we've been building up to this, I've definitely gotten more and more interested and more excited about like being able to have the conversation and getting to know more about you as a person, because you kind of have a story. I don't know. I think you feel like you should have done like maybe more of a what do they call it? A biography first, and then hit you with.
I actually started writing a biography. It's called "Who Will Tell My Story."
Nice. Because
I grew up in New Zealand and I've traveled the world, and I've lived in like so many different countries, worked with so many different people. You need an anthropologist to follow through and understand exactly my footsteps and where I've gone. So I was basically a global citizen for more than 10 years.
That's amazing.
And I was been away from New Zealand for 17 years in my travels, and it's been amazing. Like every kind of country, man. Like I've been in the thick of it. It's been a great journey.
Dude, I love it. And honestly, it's I'm going to be completely honest. It's something that I've worked to try and do, especially because of rugby giving so much of, for lack of a better word, an opening, an opportunity, I think in a unique way to be able to travel and hopefully be able to travel into some of these places that are always considered as controversial. The U.S. citizen component of it might create some, little variants, but I'm hoping if I get this Brazilian citizenship, we might be able to slide through some of these countries that are not so open to the U.S. passport, to say the least.
Okay, yeah. Brazil is an amazing place, man. I spent a long time there.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Yeah. We will talk about that. But before we get into all that, I always like to say every superhero has their origin story, and I always love to make sure that we know where people started from. So, Theo, if you're ready, as you're ready, how did you get started with rugby?
Well, it just so happens that my father was a manager of a rugby team, and my mother was involved in the committee of a rugby club in New Zealand. Like before I was even, I was just born when they started getting involved heavily.
It's in the blood from the get-go.
Mate, it gets better. So I have 3 older brothers and a sister, and my 3 older brothers played for the local club, and there's 10 years between me and my next brother, so I'm the youngest by 10 years. So I kind of came out of the womb seeing these guys, everything about rugby. Wow. And then as our family started to grow, and mum and dad brought a few people in to stay with us from time to time, they never had enough space in their house. And then the rugby club was selling off their hall beside the rugby club that people used to go and eat and have all their functions in. And so my parents went and brought that part of the rugby club, put it on a truck, drove it out to home, and then attached it to the house. So in a way, I was kind of brought up half in a rugby club. And that's basically where my room was out the back of the rugby club.
I feel like it's like one of those situations where, the rugby club, they've left their markings, their symbolisms on the wall, and now you just forever have this like room full of like random historical symbolism around it. I don't know if that was how it was, but this is how I like to imagine it a bit. But just like to be able to have literally a part of the club. You are literally a part of its upbringing, its interior.
Yeah, it's DNA. And then so I played rugby there. The first time I played rugby was 4.5 years old. Because I was just tackling everything in sight, and I was just into everything. And but as I grew up and came through that club system, we moved back to the city that I was actually born in. So I was 1 year old when I moved out.
What was the city that you were born in?
Tauranga.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was brought basically in Tokoroa in the middle of the North Island. And then I moved back to Tauranga later on in life, and I walked into this rugby club rooms. And my dad said, you should go and play rugby over there. So I was like, sweet. So I walk in there. And that's actually where my brothers grew up playing. So when they were in their, in their childhood and then through their teenage lives, they were playing in this club, and I walked in there. And then straight away there was a guy and he goes, you must be a Bennett. And I'm like, what? Like people, she knew me because I'm like very, very, I look very similar to my brothers.
Yeah.
In the way I conducted myself. And then I was just like, and I go looking around the photos in the club room when I'm, here am I, maybe 18 or 19 years old. And there's pictures of my brothers, like all hanging up on the wall because I did everything from under 8s to under 10s to everything. And like the amount of ancestry and attachment that I felt to that club at that time was just like blew me away. Something I didn't expect to see.
So forgive me on a little bit of my ignorance on it, but the area that you were, I understand that New Zealand has a lot of space, a lot of farmland. Was that kind of like the area that you lived? One of those, I like to call them villages, to say the least. I don't know whether, but it's a village, small amount of people, but close knit, but a small population of people. Was that kind of the area that you lived?
Man, I grew up in a place called Tokoroa, and there's like 2,000 people that live there.
Wow.
And we had 3 rugby clubs. And those because that's like, it's rugby, man. Like you either worked in the forestry, you were a farmer, you might have worked in town or the local mill, or you were involved in some maybe gang life at that time in the 80s, in the early 80s. And so rugby is where people would find their commonality and sort things out. And like I grew up seeing my brothers. There's a place that I nicknamed the Velodrome, and it's got these really high banks around the outside of a field that sits in the middle. And then around that is the 3 rugby clubs. So they would train Tuesdays and Thursdays, like very, very close to each other. And there was so much rivalry in that town, man. It was nuts. And like I just grew up watching my brothers play through that. And so it was like such a small community.
Was, as you mentioned, you know, there's these 3 elements that you grow up. Did your brothers end up also being into one of those, farmer or
they're both really, really successful farmers. Yeah,
nice.
Yes,
and in that, you know, obviously with a 10-year difference, that's basically a generational difference for all intents and purposes. Was watching them and seeing what they've done on the pitch, how they interact with the community, how much did that end up going into the process of, I guess, leading to you being able to exit out? Because a lot of times it seems that you find yourself, a lot of people will find themselves falling into the same pathway as a family, and especially one that's such a difference. It's, you either kind of choose where you see, this is what I'm going to do, or I've seen everything that I'm not necessarily fond. I get it, but I want to go a different direction. For you, how much of an influence did what your father did, what your brothers did, influence into how you made your decisions moving forward?
Well, a lot of the decisions that were made for me as a young person, as like a kid, was basically environmental, because my mother and father got divorced when I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of living with my dad on the farm, my mum and dad on the farm, and then I lived with my mother in the city. And then, you know, she ended up moving to Auckland, and then she moved from Auckland to somewhere else. And so I basically had 9 schools throughout New Zealand when I was growing up. And so I was kind of like a product of continual adaptation. So even though I had these grassroots at the farm, I just found myself moving all the time. My mother passed away when I was 13. So then I had to go and live with my dad. And then this is where I kind of started encountering a little bit more about who my brothers were in that community, in that town. And I started playing rugby again, and it was pretty full on kind of a way to grow up. So even though I had these real good core roots about who I was as a person in my family and how I saw them conduct themselves continually, I was very, very fortunate. They were kind of big personalities.
Yeah.
So I always got, one thing that's kind of very missing in today's culture is the art of storytelling.
Agreed.
And so, you know, like I used to hear stories about my brothers. No matter where I went, I would hear about them because they were pretty cool, man. Like, and so, and I remember like I was hanging out with a mate of mine when I moved to Tauranga I think I was 19 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing in the garage with him, and it was a night before a big game, and his uncle walked in. He looks at me, he goes, "Oh, familiar." And I was like, "I don't know, bro, I haven't met you before." And then this guy, "Oh, this is Theo Bennett." And he was like, "Bennett, are you Warren's brother?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, got some stories about that guy." And that's how I went. And I was like, "What?" Just like out of nowhere, like the stories would find me.
But how much of an interaction did you actually have with your brother? I mean, I get from the stories and of course it creates almost a legend. And obviously living with your mother and you having change, obviously it create a bit of growth distance, give or take. But whenever you did end up coming back to living with your dad and outside of the rugby club and the people around it, how much of an interaction did you have with your brothers directly as opposed to through hearsay, through other people's experiences?
Probably not enough, and not, because, they had their lives. By that time, they were growing with young families and, so they had commitments and, they had mouths to feed and things that they wanted to settle for themselves. And I was fortunate that my dad was very, much the vein of, you're created for the world and you want to do something, you do it, and I'm just like, okay. And sometimes they're like, "Hey, Dad, can you drop me in town? Because I got to meet my mates." And he'd be like, "No." He goes, "I've been at work all day. I can't do it." And I'm like, "All right, then. See you when I get back." And I'd just walk out the door and start walking to town. And I mean, it used to be an hour and a half away. I'd walk in to meet my mates.
Wow.
And then I'd walk home. It's just, how I grew up, it was always very matter of fact, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I love that aspect because obviously it creates a build. And, you know, as a person, for me, you talked about having to move around a lot when you're younger. I had to move not as much as 9 schools, but, you know, I had to move around a lot, which I loved how you said you become a child of adaptation in that, where you have to be able to understand quickly the environment and how to be able to interact with it in a notion. But I've also found that at the same time, it makes one very restless as they continue getting older because you become so used to, you know, being able to be and being able to not just be in the places, but function in many places in a short period of time, that staying past a certain limit starts to make antsy might not be the right word, but it starts to make you more ready for the next step. And I assume in a small town like that, again, that already has your reputation like that, I can't imagine that playing rugby in that and living in it and having these stories and basically having this, I guess, a halo effect of family would make it easy to stay past a certain period of time. Add to that what your dad said of helping you to be a make it happen person.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that. Like, my family calls me that, like, just like the nomadic child. But there's a lot of things that contribute to that nomadicy, as you could say. Because after my mother died, I think I had a very pinnacle conversation with her, and the events leading up to her death were really traumatic for me. But the last conversation I had with her, she said to me, "Whatever you do, don't let anybody influence you, and make sure you never give up on your dreams. Never let them tell you that you can't get what you dream for." And it stuck with me. It was like such a pinnacle, high emotive part of my life that it was something that I held on to. Like, I've held on to until now to dear life. And I've done things cross borders and taken huge risks. And I mean, huge risks, not only, you know, with career wise, but with my life and, you know, with my stability and so I wanted to do this, so I'm going after it. And I wanted to be a coach at the Rio Olympics in 2016, and I found that out in 2011 that Brazil would be in the Olympics and automatically qualify. And the Brazilian Rugby Union wouldn't kind of get back to me, so I was like, "All right," I went. I went to, like, in the middle of nowhere and started coaching, and you know, but it all takes its toll. I think that's always affected my bottom line of high performance.
Yeah.
I think those risks at the same time might get me opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I've done the best that I could possibly do.
Right.
And now that I'm older, I kind of realize those things. And I've worked for some fantastic teams and some fantastic environments, but was I fantastic and was I the best that I could possibly be? I don't think so. I think that there was something always lacking because of that ability, that moving around.
Yeah.
However, it taught me so much. I think now I could enter any high performance unit in the world and do really, really well. But I think, you know, even up to the last 3 years, and I work with the US Sevens girls, and they were getting ready for the Olympics, and I had some innovative things. But if it wasn't for those innovative things, I don't think I had the track record really
to be able to
really transfer that to being a real pinnacle part of success, right? So I'm a huge realist. Like, I look at myself really hard every single day, and then go, okay, I might be different, but it doesn't mean much more than that. Like, you got to follow through.
So, and I can understand that factor. Again, it goes back to that, how much you're able to sit in it, and while also simultaneously, whether it's in town or in industry, how much are you able to sit in it to be able to cultivate and develop at its fullest? And that's a tough one to do because of the time that it takes to do it. Before continuing on that, though, what was the first moment that you actually ended up leaving New Zealand to start working overseas or start your journey? I don't know if that was necessarily your journey start, but your first moment to go. Because again, I can't get off the fact, small town kid lived within a moving city, but it's in a small country, small town that's, by all intents and purposes, very remote to everything else in the world.
I guess it's attitude that's always fueled me and almost like a fearlessness. And so when I was 17, I got selected on a student exchange at high school. Mm-hmm. And one guidance counselor told my dad, like, there's no way that this kid should be going anywhere. He should stay and finish what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And the other one was going, just go, like, let him go. He's such an adaptable kid. And so I applied for Switzerland, the USA, and the Netherlands, and I got rejected for all of those three.
Oh.
And they came back to me and they said, "Oh, but we have this opportunity in Brazil." And I was like, "Sweet, let's go."
Oh, wow.
And before I knew it, here's a 17-year-old kid, I got on a plane and you got to go back to this is 1990.
So you're talking about like right after that Brazilian dictatorship was just over, and you're kind of this transitioning country.
Yeah,
wow.
Man. And like it was full on, eh? Like you imagine like a 17-year-old kid that's only known New Zealand, and I got dropped off in the middle of Brazil.
Well, what part of Brazil did you end up going to first?
It was a place called Caxias do Sul, Rio Grande do Sul, which is the last state right down on the base of Brazil.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. It's just 6 hours down. 6 hours, yeah, just 6 hours over here from here. So
okay.
Yeah. No, I can understand. I can understand. That is farmland. That is farmland.
And like we went to Rio, and like the taxi drivers were like nuts, and something happened with one of the, because I went with a group to start to get through customs and everything.
Yeah.
And in that group, a girl got taken to the side, and we didn't see her for 2 hours. We were late coming out, and she was distraught. She ended up going home a couple of weeks after that because there was all these things that happened really, really fast when I was there. The taxis were crazy. There was like gunshots and stuff going on in the middle of the night. We weren't allowed to use our glue, like Rio de Janeiro at that time. It was just nuts.
I mean, it's what set the reputation of it for this day. To this day.
Yeah.
But, even within that, like, that's a massive. It was. I'm not gonna say it was a big culture shock going from the U.S. to Brazil, just considering everything else. But going from New Zealand to Brazil and entering into that, for you, that kind of and this is before you're starting doing this with rugby. All right, we're just talking purely within the population. How much of that began almost maybe a catalyst of how you learn to function in other countries and places? Because I can't imagine that. I'm not going to use the word chaos, but the activity level of a place like Brazil. Even I'm a Nigerian as well, so whether it's Brazil, Nigeria, these are much more active than what a lot of these places, and definitely I would assume more so than a place like New Zealand, let alone the small town. How much did that actually end up being like maybe your base for how to deal with any other country that you ended up going to?
I think it came down to, there was a stage that I started seeing a girl in Brazil, and we were at a nightclub, and then she like lived, I don't know, 3 or 4 blocks away from this nightclub. So I ended up walking her home because I'm the big tough guy. So I walked her home, and then I was just walking back. I got assaulted by these 2 guys, and they pulled a gun on me, and then it just ended up in a big fist fight.
Yeah.
And then I ended up not coming off too good. And and at that moment I thought it was done. I was done. I basically put the gun to the back of my head and said, take 10 steps, count to 10 and you're dead. And, I remember putting my hands at the back of my head like this and then walking away. And I was just like, I started counting to 10, and like in that 10 seconds or 10 steps. And I was kind of like, I said to my mum, I'll see you soon. And just like, I hope everybody forgives me for what's going on and whatever. And either way, like, it's going to be okay. And I just took this big breath, and I just felt this peace about everything.
Yeah.
But then the shot never came. And I got about 20 steps away. I stopped and turned around, and these guys were running off. And I went back to the nightclub, and they were just like, what happened to you? Like, I was just like cut and bleeding and just like,
bro.
And I think I suffered like a lot of PTSD after that for for quite a long time.
I have to imagine, because there's not a situation where you don't become highly alert from your surroundings after that. Just on the fact that you like, I'm a person who I get much like you was. I don't worry about my environment too much, but I'll use an example like getting into a fender bender. Someone comes hit you from behind just randomly, and it doesn't hurt you. The car's fine. For me, it didn't hurt. But from that point on, I am been highly susceptible of anything that goes around me, whether it's driving, whether people are going to the stop sign or whatever. I'm always now in this moment where it's just like, you just need to be on the red alert. Like there's always a little bit of a red alert that's going on. It dims as time goes on, but it dims. And I assume that early stages, that PTSD was just, especially when your life is on the line.
Oh yeah, like 100%. Like in New Zealand, I was used to like getting in the fights every now and then on the rugby field, if not stand up for myself in high school or whatever, like those things happen.
Right.
But to this degree, it was like a whole nother level. And I remember about 2 weeks after I recovered, because I was a bit, I just stayed home. I didn't say much. I just stayed home, didn't really talk to anybody. I was like, cut my ass kicked. And so, and then I got on a bus and I was going back into town because I had some people to meet, and I didn't want to just suffer sitting at home the whole time. I just wanted to, get on with things. And I remember holding onto the railing inside of a bus and looking out the window. And I swear I saw the dude that assaulted me standing there with a woman and a baby. And he looked at me and I looked at him. And I just felt like I was going to pee my pants. Like I was just like, got so scared. And like I rode the bus and missed my stop and went too far. I just did the whole circuit. Then got out of the bus and then went home because it just did this big circuit. So I just stayed on it the whole way, went inside, closed the door, and I just kind of sat on my bed and I was like, that's freaky. Imagine if, like what else could happen from now if he recognizes me, I recognize him.
Right.
Like, what else could actually go wrong in a situation? And so, yeah, like it took a lot of years to get over that. And I think I remember the specific day I was playing under 21s back in New Zealand after a bit of time gone by. And I was a bit shy of contact for some reason. Like my ability to tackle like really, really dropped off, and I became pretty flighty and just not keen.
Yeah.
And then I remember I was facing this big Islander guy, and he was huge, man. And he was running through everybody, and just it was like the Jonah Lomu of the time kind of thing. And I was like, and then I was like, what's the worst that's going to happen?
I mean, you survived this. Let me go through your body into it. Did you make the stop?
Yeah, man. Like I smoked him. First time I ever tried outside in defense. Like I had to change something, and the coach wouldn't pull me off. We're already losing, and he goes, "If I pull you off now, there's no growth. You're just going to be the same." Because I said to him, I can come off because like I missed every tackle on the dude, man. In the first half, I was like, phew. And he was like, "You got to figure it out, man. Like, can't take this away from you." And I was like, "All right, then let's have a crack at it." So then I just changed my position. He got the ball and I smoked him. And then he lost the ball. We got it. We picked it. We got the only try of the match, and everybody was like, "Yeah." But it's not necessarily. And that kind of changed the way I was with rugby. But then it kind of changed my narrative for life as well.
Do tell. Because I mean, I can't. Well, actually, before you go, like before all of it, were you a religious person or a spiritual person in that element? Just I know New Zealand is, I think, Catholic country, more or less.
Well, religion in New Zealand is like truly conflicted because rugby is so powerful and horse racing was back in the day. And so like if the All Blacks were playing, nobody would be going to church. If there was rugby on Saturday, there was nothing going on. So it was like literally when we talk about religions in countries, and New Zealand has one of the most staunch religions of rugby in the world. And it was big, hard farmers and Polynesians and Maori and
right.
New Zealand became known because of rugby, right? So I don't know how much you know about the All Blacks and how that was all created, and and how impactful that was around the world. But in the First World War, they wanted to boost morale within one of the camps in Egypt or so, I think it was, and they went out there, decided to have this rugby match, and all the different countries got together and played off, and New Zealand won it.
Yeah.
So then they invited New Zealand on the tour, and then they went away and they won everything because, at that time, New Zealand had real hard immigrants, right? So we're talking Scottish and English and Irish, big burly boys and some fast, hard men that had to work on the New Zealand farmlands to get that established. So it was only, very, very close to that. And then with the world wars, so New Zealand come back beating England, like swiping them, winning all this. All of a sudden, the world knew who New Zealand was.
New Zealand had entered the map.
Yeah, and then it just that just kept hammering away. So it's everything's to do with culture and how it was created.
No, that's true, and it sets the ripple effect that you the way that the culture reshapes itself from that point on, as well. But so fair. So in that situation, so maybe before the religion was the spirituality, the belief is rugby. The belief is that, but after a significant moment, and obviously we're talking about jarring effect, young kid. First time out the country, really, within this group, in this other country that is literally an exact opposite. You come back, and obviously, let's call it, you had the yips of rugby. Like, what was your pull to continue on? Because this is also not a time period where therapy was exactly lauded in the world, unless you were considered crazy or there was something wrong in the family. So for you, what was it that you used to kind of help draw you back out? Was it the extreme focus into the rugby, or was there something else that added to that?
I think it was being like the chameleon in different groups of people, and being super kind of expressive. Like, I was involved in music and I was just like training all the time, and I'd have different groups of friends. So I didn't really need to lean on my family or, talk to anybody about any of it exactly. I would just like bounce around these groups, and just be this chameleon. And then when I couldn't find it, I would make my community. Like I would find something to start, to gather people around me, and then go.
Nice.
And so, when it talks about like spirituality and things like that, I don't think I really entered that realm. However, after my mother died, in a garage sale that was up the road, I found a book, and it had a tiger on the front, and it was called Taming the Tiger. And I was like, this is going to be great because I like tigers. And I was into Kung Fu, and this is the 80s. Like Bruce Lee was the man to me. And I was like, yeah, I like Bruce Lee. And I was like, wow, okay. So then I go home and I sit down, but this is not a bloody story about a tiger. It's talking about someone's brain or something. But me being me, who's like just like totally,
I'm gonna make it happen. I'm gonna finish this thing here.
Yeah, man, I did. I got a dictionary. I looked up the words I didn't understand, and I read it, and it was talking about taming the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
And I was 13, and I had some pretty lonely times there because I got transplanted into a place I had no friends whatsoever.
Right.
And my dad would go to work, and I'd go to school and come home, and it'd be nothing. I'd be like,
That's a different level of quiet. That's whenever life gets not quiet, when it gets silent. And I consider that to be very different than just quiet. Quiet at least is just, it's dim, but you feel at least your environment. When it's silent, it feels like nothing moves. And that is a different version of an empty that goes right there.
With the players that I've coached in the past, like especially in the last probably 5 years, I talk about the white wall. And there's a white wall coming for us all. Like it's going to be there. And when you finish the tournament and you finish this and you get on the plane, you're going to hit the white wall. Like it's there. And then who are you when that hits?
Man. Whew. I want to let that one sink. Let that one sink. Because that's real. Interesting.
It's like super, like those kind of experiences that I did have growing up really influenced how I look at coaching.
Yeah. And that's what I want to kind of move into, the beginning of your stages going to coaching. Obviously, as a player, I'm assuming admirable enough player, but again, weren't going to play for the All Blacks, weren't going to play for pro teams. What took you into that next stage for coaching? Was it just the nature of rugby being in the blood, or was there something that you felt actually compelled you into it?
It was part of, I was doing a sport and recreation course in New Zealand, and a part of that was to do a coaching certificate, and you have to like kind of find some people that you have to coach.
Mm-hmm.
And like I went to, I changed colleges at one stage, and I built a rapport with some people there, the PE teachers and stuff. And I said, look, I've got to do this course. And they said, we've got some like I think it was under 16s that we need a coach for. And I was like, sweet, I'll take them. And I started coaching them, and I realized, hey, I'm actually okay with this. Like I kind of do okay. And we built up like such really good, unique friendships between the players and I, because realistically there wasn't much difference. I was probably 21 maybe, or 20. And
so this was maybe about a year and a half after you got back from Brazil, a year after you got back from Brazil, give or take. Yeah, and I really, really found my place with them. And I found like the authenticity that they had and their enthusiasm, because we were the Mighty Ducks, like we were pretty bad. And then we got better and better the more we trained. And I was like the influences of my brothers when I was little. And there was a specific coach that I had in the under 16s for me personally. His name was Kevin Ormsby. And unfortunately, he got killed in an accident halfway through our season. And it left this thing inside me too. Like, he was like one of the best men. Yeah, one of the best men that I've ever met. And he really, really gave me time. He could see that I was like super shy about some things. And after the death of my mother, it was like very, I found like this kind of console in this strong, moldy man. And he, I think after that really jolted how I looked at coaching. And so when I took these young guys on, I was like they were part of me was a part of him, right? Right.
And I represented a little bit of that. So I made sure that I didn't drop on that line of integrity. And it just kind of like kept growing. And I coached some touch rugby, and then went back to rugby a little bit. And then I decided I'm just going to dedicate myself into doing exercise science. So sports specific training for athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that really, really, really well at the time, in kind of that mid 90s. And then I was an avid touch rugby player. and I fractured my skull at 21 playing rugby, so I had to kind of transition over for a while and just give my brain a rest. And so I started playing touch rugby. And then when I moved to Australia, I got fed up with touch in New Zealand, so I went to Australia and played over there. And I was working in the gym, and a guy comes in, he goes, "Oh, do you know much about rugby?" And I was like, "A little bit." And he goes, "Well, our coach just walked out and has taken all the first and second grade players. And it's just like a nightmare at this club, but we really need a coach." And I was like, sweet.
Wait, hold on. Okay. You're at the gym, you're random, and they're just like, hey, you need a coach. Were they
yeah, and I was just like,
was there already an awareness of a coach? Or they were just like, you're from New Zealand. Do you coach? Do you do rugby? Like, how does that work? Like, was there already a relationship and they found you? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Well, it makes sense in the terms of that I was always able to pull out information from people and relate to them.
Gotcha.
Because of that kind of like ability to like basically having startups all the time, right? So, after you do a gym program for somebody, they get to know you and they want to do rugby specific. So I'm like, okay, I'm giving them rugby specific stuff and it's all good. And then they're like, a little bit about this. And I'm like, yeah, a little bit. Have you coached? Oh, yeah. Like it just kind of flows on. And the opportunity came. I said, yes. And man, I took over. We lost 47 games in a row.
God, dog.
And
but that was also, again, a situation where the club was still in distress. So it was almost like rebuilding culture in that moment.
Yeah. Like I learned so much about sticking to the process over, like focusing on outcomes. The first game we lost was 125-0. And then the next round, that team came back and they beat us like 95-10 or 95-5 or something. And we had the biggest party in the changing room, and they couldn't believe it. We walked in there, we gave them beers, and they were like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "We kept you under 100." And like, the next time we played them, they got down to like 50-20. And then the third time that we played them, the next season, like we're getting closer, the margins come down. And after 47 games, we won our first game in that tournament. And like we reinvented the culture and of that club. It just took such a long time to do, but it was worth it.
Was that basis for you creating culture? Because I assume this is a regular theme based off of just the places that you just talked about coaching, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Australia, whether it's New Zealand. Like the idea of creating culture, was that just an affect of Hornsby or your friend Hornsby, or was this again going back to these philosophies that you learned from how your brother was treated in terms of storytelling, to how you dealt with things in Brazil, to adaptation? What ended up being your built concept of team culture that you started to use as a core element moving forward?
I became the head of the family. It gave me purpose and belonging. And it gave me an opportunity to look after the people that were around me.
Yeah.
And I met kindred spirits, basically.
Right.
Young men that had a really, really strong warrior code about them that just wanted to play. And because I guess my authenticity towards that journey of going, you are like, I had to go and pull the boys out from like getting arrested on a Friday night so they can play Saturday. Like, and at the point I couldn't control these guys, man. Like, they were just wild dudes. But when I started building, it was all the wild cards. And so I was like, can't beat them. Join them. So then I'll be out just to make sure they didn't go to get locked up.
Which is fair.
Yeah.
You keep them corralled, not corralled in, but at least it keeps an honest gauge, middle gauge for everybody.
I tell you the secret. You ready for it?
Yes, let's go.
Bacon and eggs for breakfast at my house if you want to come and play.
That's legit. Actually,
so the boys will turn up.
That makes the most sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We always talk about this culture of rugby, especially when it comes to the networking, with the camaraderie of it. And it speaks a lot, again, to that home value, I like to say, that is felt, where I feel like the strongest teams are the ones that there is a place to call home. Not necessarily like the pub, but there's a place where people feel like they can remove the world off their shoulders for this moment.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's something about I talk about the warrior code a lot with the few people that I talk to at the moment. So, the warrior code is really strong. What that is like having a strong warrior code is to be very adaptable and very clear-minded in every kind of environment. And it's to be harmonious. So it's to have enough skills
to make sure everything's flows.
Yeah, and so what rugby basically does, though, is it puts a warrior in his place, where you can't go thinking about yesterday, you can't go thinking about tomorrow. You need to think about this present moment. Yeah, and in that flow state as such, like people, it generally saves lives. Like I've been heavily involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now for like the last 10 years. And apart from rugby, I think Jiu-Jitsu has been one of the most core, hugest developers that I've ever been on. Like it's so internalizing. The journey is just amazing. And I just recommend that every single person go and do it, because you're gonna get faced with so many barriers within yourself.
No, I heard the same thing with Thai boxing, Thai kickboxing. Again, because you see it in the training where it pushes your body to a different level because of the way that it gets presented. Like there's the fighter way that we get here, but at home, in its home, the way that it's presented. I remember a young lady from Canada who was living in Thailand who was doing this initially was telling me about it, because I haven't personally done it myself. But creating that element of focusing you into your present moment to allow you to be able to have, I guess, maybe the most control in your arena, in that, to have the most peace in that, right? Because if you don't, it's danger. If you're in a fight, if you're in the ring, if you're in a match, it's the most fight in that.
Yeah, well, you think about when most injuries come from lack of attention, a lack of awareness of what's going on around you.
Lack of
Yeah. And so like it's always about, if you really want to, like you can imagine the injuries that we would have had if we were losing 125-0 and lost 47 games in a row. I was the first aid guy. I was strapping people's shoulders and ankles. We went through more tape in like 1 weekend than what clubs would go through in a year just to keep the boys. Sometimes we'd turn up, we'd have 13 players and the boys would play. But it is
no subs.
No subs, man. Like we started like raw. Like there was nothing. There was just like me and them, and it's like I pulled on the boots a couple of times. It wasn't that good, but I pulled on the boots a couple of times and got out there with the boys. But it just, mate, there is a place that people belong, and the world disappears.
That's a realist.
And while on we tip on high performance coaches, like while high performance coaches at times try to put people through the ringer, and they try to break people down to see who they are, don't really need to do that, because the way the game is structured right now, the pressure of occasion, the pressure of performance, all these things now they pressurize a person to reveal who they are eventually anyway.
Yeah.
And all you need to do is hold space and foresight. And where I'm saying is, when I talked about the warrior code, like as a coach, you need to have a certain kind of code that you live by that keeps you grounded. And when I talked earlier on about how, my successes, I think I could have done a lot better. At times, I was very, very strong in my warrior code because I was probably closer to jiu-jitsu when I was coaching. But the further I got from jiu-jitsu, the further away I got from that. So it's like on a personal pursuit, like you have to be a way of action.
Is that part of is that part of the reason also why you also found yourself moving around so much? It was because I love the way that you call it, the personal pursuit, and if you can also kind of speak to the countries that you ended up coaching at in this time, but in that process of going from place to place to place and dealing with these, do you feel like you were trying to also find yourself in that and find a pursuit? And ironically, in the pursuit of finding self, it starts taking you away from your base a little bit.
Yeah, I think that you don't really know who you are until you encounter difficulties. Like I think that's like that's super interesting, like how we view and our reaction to circumstance.
Yeah.
And there's, in the second chapter of Virtuitis, my book, Virtuitis says a line: circumstance is where a coward lays blame. Because we could always say it's always this, it's always that, it's always that. Yeah, exactly. But it's always, there is something that just happened. I need to be able to resolve that. I need to be able to look in that in a way so that I have that desired outcome, the best outcome possible, not necessarily for me, but for how I respond to the world and how I look at it, for example, because I'm empathetic towards this person, or because, no, this person's taken advantage, so I need to stop that, or blah, 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 blah. It just goes on, like the list of things that you can justify yourself go a million miles an hour.
There's a million reasons not to do something. There's only a few that will make you go do it. Which one do you want to, which side do you want to choose?
Yeah, absolutely. So every time we come across something that's difficult, like Marcus Aurelius says, like the impediment action creates the action.
Right.
The obstacle is the way, right? So he was like, we have this linear thought process, and we're taught that through sport, business, that this is how we go from A to B. But I firmly believe that this is life, right? And it takes us around. We can't get away from being ourselves. We can't get away from our lessons as much as you want to run away from it.
Right.
Like it's having that ability to look at yourself in a different way.
No, and it was funny. I listened to this thing. This was it was an entrepreneurship podcast, but there's something at the end of it that really stood out, which was more of to the effect of, we all have a level that we always kind of hit a ceiling on, and we have a choice. You either can get to that level and stop, and while you might have been able to satisfy everything from below, you'll never really feel the completion of it. But you can always just step away and say, hey, I can go a different direction. Or you take the moment and you break through and you get to see how much more of the other side that you have, because once you've broken through that ceiling, it opens up something else in you. I think it was to that effect. It was opening up something to that effect. But it goes back to that obstacle. We always have that. There's always that ceiling. I know for me, it's very normal. For me, there's always this thing that feels like you're not ready. You're not ready. You hit it and it's like, I don't know why I'm not breaking it. Let me see if I can go around it. No, can't go around it. Is there another way for me to get to my objective without dealing with this? No. What do you eventually have to do? You have to take the obstacle because it really doesn't present another way for you. But once you know that you go through it, it almost feels like you're unstoppable, to say the least.
Yeah, like we can take something like really like personal for me is like writing Virtuitis, for example.
Mm.
Like it's pretty demanding, but you can beat yourself into submission about accepting who you are. And it's just like, I never doubted for one moment that I wasn't a writer. Like as soon as I started, I was like, there cannot be room for doubt because the reader can sniff doubt out. Like, you know, like, and I can sniff it out if I get too far away from who I am. And like, sure enough, I failed in so many countless times with editors and with people, beta readers, and like getting feedback. And it's like, you're knocking against a brick wall, like so many times. But I think that life and rugby and everything around us, it's always a measure of a bounce back. It's always a measure about understanding your processes. Do you need more time? Do you need less time? Do you just need to hit it again? What voices are you creating? Are you creating that just get up and go again? Oh yeah, you know, you're being silly, you're being dumb, or is it? It's okay, mate. Get on your feet. Let's go again. Like it's nothing on the big scale of things. This is just a little hiccup. Like how are your processes? Where do you get your bounce back from?
Right.
And like I have a huge bounce back, like from one conversation to the next. It's just like, sweet, let's go.
You know, it's interesting because I always wonder if there's two sides to that. Because there's one side is the bounce back, which it always feels like the bounce back is I know what the problem is, but I don't want to let the problem sit as a weight for me, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to talk for myself, and then I just want to get your thoughts on it. For me, there's a problem exists. I can either sit in the problem or I let the problem lay off my shoulder and move on, right? Mm-hmm. And go on to the next thing so I can try and solve whatever the solution that I'm trying to achieve, right? But then there's this other side that I've started to think of or started to realize where maybe there's an issue of not letting a problem sit enough where I'm not taking in the significance of what that problem provides. And it forces me to go, I'm thinking of more of how to do the solution that gets me to my point quickest, as opposed to let me understand what my problem is so I can get to my solution that gives me the efficiency to it. For you, like, how do you see it on that? Like, do you see the issue on that, or is it just like they both are one and the same kind of like?
You got to roll your sleeves up and get to the bottom of your problems at times. But then sometimes you're faced with problems that you don't really know the answers with, and the consequences can be kind of catastrophic. So, you know, you got to ask yourself: are you in the architecture of your problem, or are you the architect of your problem? Like, where does your viewpoint sit and what's required?
Word.
Like, should I sit back and just watch and see how I want to react and want to respond to this? Or is it like, okay, it's fisticuffs, man. Like, I'm going at it with myself, or I have to do this, I have to do that. Like, I think it comes down to judgment about how you need to react to it. But the only way to have some kind of equal judgment is to have continual adversity.
Right.
And then if you're faced with that kind of adversity, because there's two really successful people that go through a lot of adversity to get good experience, they become successful.
Right.
And then there's people that have such a well-nurtured background that haven't had much conflict, seem to find themselves quite successful as well. And I'm not saying that people, success is always relative to what you want. I consider myself a very successful person.
Mm-hmm.
But people wouldn't look at, but maybe other people would look at me and, like say, nah, he's not that successful. But like I
die to beholder, but
you think.
I will always say, if you've gotten a chance to experience the world in an upfront way versus simply being able to hearsay, I will always consider that to be one that is successful, because people experience I do find to be a little bit of higher than simply financial, because being financially successful alongside doing no real human experience is not success.
Well, the human brain is really nuts. And
true story.
And basically it's this, like, we are just specks in a universe. Here in 300 years and 400 years, I doubt if anybody's ever going to think about this podcast. And we might think, I'm going to write a book because I want to be, like, there's nothing like the books that I write. Like, like 700 years ago, how many books went missing? 400 years ago, how many went missing? How many identities went? We're just specks. We're gone.
But I don't know if that's, but here's the thing. I don't know if that's fully true, though, because there's one thing that we can always say, and he even kind of spoke to it when he talked about the impact of New Zealand from World War I to what's happening now. I think the specifics might disappear, the extreme detail, who is it from, what is the source, but the ripple effects of them do have an account, because obviously through generational change, you share information, you combine information, it goes through and it starts to move from it a conscious element to an unconscious element. And so it's the like you said, nobody might remember Grow Rugby, or they'll remember the Rugby Pod or whatever, but maybe the information that was taken from that, or the perspective that was taken from that, seeds into one person, and that can changes or adds another aspect of how they perceive their life, and that becomes a straightaway, whether it's transferring information to a friend or to kids or anything like that.
Yeah. There's two ways of looking at it. Is what you're saying is it gets ingrained in your DNA, basically, right? And it gets passed on, and there's this like instinct of intuition and intelligence, emotional intelligence, and like deeper intelligence of a human being beyond anything that they've experienced before.
Right.
It's just in them. Right. That's one way of looking at it, and that's great. And I've motivated and I've talked to people about that same philosophy, and I do agree with you. That's great. But there's also the other one, which is we are like this big in the universe, and something could happen and we're gone. And
True.
So, like there's our brain is not to really compute about the minuscule speck we are in the universe. Like, our brains can't handle it.
True. I mean, look, it's there's only so much, but I mean, again, from person to person, that is true. But I guess that's also the good part. That's what also allows you to either choose to either be in the moment or to worry so much about things that you can't control. It provides a limitation. Before we go, I wanted to talk a little bit on Virtuitis, and kind of get, what was the motivation behind you writing the book? We've talked a lot about your philosophy, your characteristic in that. I know we probably could have talked more rugby, but I'm not going to lie. I like your philosophy a lot more, and I'm really interested in how you see the world. So forgive me on that one. But, what was the motivation on Virtuitis, and why you decided to write it?
I was in lockdown in 2019. And I was sitting in the garage, for COVID. So I went back to New Zealand because of circumstances. Yeah, I was sitting in my brother's garage, and I had like 2 weeks of quarantine, and then New Zealand went down on a harder lockdown. So it ended up to be quite a long time, and I didn't want to come out with nothing. I needed to choose something to keep me occupied. I had views on leadership development. I had views on coaching. I had views on all these things, and the warrior code and my experiences, and I wanted to let it be released. And I hate talking about myself. Like, I don't hate it, but I do. I talk about myself in a very reserved manner, and I didn't.
Very New Zealand, by the way. Very New Zealander of it.
Yeah. And I would rather write about a third person, and then I had some kind of conflicted views about value systems and like how they create people. And I liked the warrior code aspect. And I created like a virtue system that I thought that would be very interesting to explore. And Virtuitis, which means virtuous in Latin, was a way for me to explore these things. At the same time, dealing with like leadership development issues and things like that. And he's very much a failed leader, and it's not a hero's journey, so don't go expecting any pretty stuff, because it's pretty raw.
It sounds, and forgive me if it's not the exact, but it sounds very Sophie's Choice in a lot of ways, from how you explain it.
I haven't read Sophie's Choice, but yeah, if she gets nailed all the time, yep.
It's
and by nailed, I mean she is continually
just constantly within.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, from your, as you put it in, was this more so? Obviously, like you said, you don't talk about yourself directly, but for you, was this one where it felt like this was your kind of a dump of your knowledge, a dump of your experiences, albeit through the eyes of another person, but kind of a culmination of everything that you've been going through, being able to put it into this writing format and shape it into something that maybe becomes very manual-esque for somebody, while also trying to maybe create a perspective?
You're a smart guy, eh, Gift? Mate, it's basically Virtuitis as a trilogy, and with each trilogy there's a manual that goes with it.
Nice.
And I wanted to create a character that I could destroy, and so that I can help, create epiphanies and evolution in this guy after he's lost everything, and then finally at the last minute when he kind of gets it, it's kind of too late. But it's the whole journey. It's the rebuilding process. It's the first volume is basically failed leadership decisions, one on top of the other. It's heart-wrenching and it's cool. It's gripping.
No, I love it. But I love that. Look, people, there's a reason why drama is significant, and even in the darkness you find light. So to be able to have that kind of element where you're creating a world that is obscured, to say the least, that's where you find it goes back to as you said, it is through the obstacles that you end up finding out the most of who you are, and being able to get that element and show the pounding, creating I take it as it gives you, I guess, the epiphanies for the reader and for the character themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the Virtuitis, the main character, is not the smartest guy. He's good at one particular thing. He's a good warrior and he's a good tactician, but he's not the most smartest guy in the room. There's always the people around him that educate him, that give him the different things to think about, that influence him. And that's where he becomes a really, really good learner by the end of the day.
And as you were writing, and this will be the last question to let you go, but as you were writing it, what was it that you felt, did you reveal about yourself in it? Because I know, especially whenever you start to write honestly, vulnerably in these elements, sometimes it can bring back stuff that you may have either put to the side or maybe forgotten altogether, or maybe it just wasn't something that you thought about, and even in general. Was there anything that you yourself learned from your process of writing this book and the ultimate completion of it?
I don't think I could ever be as courageous as him. And for all the courage and the bravery and the skill sets that he has, when it comes down to the crunch, it helped me understand how far away from that I am. And it sets a bar really, really high for me personally about how I would conduct myself in certain situations. And that I'm nowhere near as good as what he is, even though he's already really flawed.
That's nice. That's nice. Look, I can't think of a better way to be able to let us go. Theo, where can people find you?
You'll never find me, but you can find the book on... You can
people find out more about Virtuitis?
Just go to Amazon Books and then put in Virtuitis, and it'll pop up there. It's done really, really well. I got to Amazon. It got #1 in its category for like 4 days, beat out Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Like, it did really, really good, and it's floating in between the top 10 now. So it just kind of sits there and it's humming away, and the goal is to keep it there. But
I love it.
Yeah, we'll see. It's done really well for itself, and I'm pretty proud of it. So.
Man, I'm happy to hear that. Theo, look, I'm going to be honest with you. We're going to have to do more, because I think next time we actually have to talk about more of your coaching journey. But right now, I am so happy that we had a chance to just be able to talk the philosophy and get to actually know a lot more of your story. And I learned a lot from this. So I definitely appreciate you, again, taking the time to just be here.
Oh, mate, I got nothing but gratitude for you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yo, Theo, my man, bro. I appreciate you coming through. Man, great conversation. Can't wait till the next time we get a chance to talk. And y'all, by all means, please check out some of our other podcasts. Definitely keep looking in Rugby Inc. all the time. Last week, we had the great... We had the great Tito Miranda, head coach for Howard University men. Before that, we had Adam Hughes, the author of This is Rugby, The Story, Culture, and Future of American Rugby. Great book. Of course, mentioned Catherine Aversanu. We had Danny Lamb. We had Kunda Rasiki, promoter Kiset Shiranganji, Daniel Davalier. Some amazing guests. Even going back into our past, Jen Salomon, who's over at representing for Mexico at the Rand Sevens. We had Cody Melfi, Olympic, and was over in Hong Kong for USA 7 with the USA Sevens team. Maria Thomas, president for Trinidad and Tobago. Phaedra Knight, Squidge Rugby, Robbie Owens, and so much more. Definitely want to check out what we have here on the podcast. It is some great guests, great conversations. Learn more. It is rugby, but it's not just all rugby because it is all opportunity. And of course, in opportunity, it is most important that I want you to know that I hope that you are happy. I hope that you are healthy. And I hope that you know that you are highly favored. Until next time, y'all. Cheers.